6 minutes after 7 o'clock in Trinidad and Tobago, where there's a lot going on that we can chat with our next guest, attorney at law Martin George, as far as topics for conversation this morning. Originally, he was invited to share his perspective as a former member of the Police Service Commission on the selection process for the top cop as advertised in the newspaper. You know, when I realized I was going to have this discussion with Martin George, I almost stoops, you know. So where are we going with this again? However, we must get his view as well. I don't have enough spit in my mouth for the next troops with the latest happenings in the PRCO corruption matter. He joins us now, Martin George. I mean, I don't know where we're going with this, Martin George, but I mean, we had invited you primarily to talk about the Police Service Commission thing and the advertisement for a job opportunity. Just give us your view on this process that we are revisiting once more. Good morning to you.
With PRCO, Fazil, good morning to you and good morning Trinidad and Tobago. It's a scenario and a conundrum from which there is no easy escape for the state. Any which way you look at it, it's going to be a tortuous and complicated climb down from this process. Because the Privy Council having given that ruling, it means that you now are impaled on the horns of a dilemma. In other words, what does the DPP at this point do? Now, of course, he does have the power where he can issue, the indictment for the matters to go to the High Court to be tried. He can do that. He does have that power. Of course, there will be questions of the delay, the process, then balancing that, you have the issue that these applicants themselves are the main protagonists in terms of the multiplicity of legal applications through the courts. So you can't use your own flood of litigation, which has dragged on over the years, to say, look, that has caused a delay, if you understand me, because you are the one initiating those legal actions. So in that regard, it may provide a narrow window for the DPP by which he may be able to say, well, look, he's exercising his own power and preferring the indictments for them to be tried in the High Court without going back to restart a preliminary inquiry. I cannot see, respectfully, that being an option at all. That one, I think anyone could realistically challenge and raise as an abusive process if you are to go and restart the preliminary inquiry in PRCO 1, because the first preliminary inquiry took about 3 or 4 years just to be completed.
And Mr. George, I know this will sound like an absurd question, but does it really matter anymore? Beyond the political toing and froing and the fact that we have a local government and it might be seen as good political ammunition to throw at the UNC because they were in office when the airport was built and so on. In the real world of the ordinary citizen who might say yay or nay, whether they hang them high or whether they get off scot-free, the real issue is that this matter is never going to end and we're going to keep paying for it.
Well, the thing is, I guess from a myopic perspective, yes, you can look at it that way. However, the bigger picture has to be that as a nation, we must insist upon and try to hold our public officials to account and accountability and transparency in their actions.
But Mr. George, that is the issue. I'm glad you raised that as the bigger picture. Because the bigger picture is that we can't, because of the expert acumen and skills of people like yourself and others who tie us around in rings and we keep paying the bill.
Yeah, I know, but the point is it has been done. Let's not forget, in the US, remember, Gutierrez and Bill Hillman, they were both convicted in the US several years ago. So the US justice system worked, they served their sentences. So the fact of the matter is not impossible to hold persons to account. It's just a question of the way our judicial system has functioned or malfunctioned. So is
that then, Mr. George? Is that really the crux of the matter? Is it not so much the specifics of our jurisprudence, but the people who are populating it, who use it or misuse it or manipulate it for their own interests and are allowed to get away with it?
Well, I mean, that's the reality, Fazil. But I mean, we ought not to throw our hands up in the air and say, well, look, in those circumstances, let all hell break loose. I think we still have a duty to try to, pursue the ends of justice. And when I say justice, I mean balancing the scales. You balance the rights of the accused and of course their right to be dealt with in an expeditious manner. I mean, of course, in Trinidad and Tobago, we don't have any constitutional right to a speedy trial. Maybe that is something we need to look at because that is in the Jamaican Constitution, right? And that's where the whole issue of the Pratt and Morgan, if you recall, how those decisions came about in the Privy Council,
sure,
right? But we probably need to look at making that part of our constitution. So therefore that will then put the pressure on judicial officers to ensure that they get matters completed in a timely manner and that they don't allow the excessive, delays. And I'll tell you something, Fazil. In the criminal justice system in Trinidad and Tobago, you have quite a lot of the requests for adjournment coming from the prosecution. I'll tell you this, most times defendants and defense attorneys are ready to proceed. It's usually the state, the prosecution, who are the ones who are not ready. So therefore the state has no one else to blame. If it is that the record reflects that they are the ones who have asked for most of the adjournments, they have no one else to blame but themselves. If it is that you then are faced with an allegation of abuse of process and excessive delays.
I hear you on that because we've heard the DPP talk about the issues of staffing. We heard him raise concerns when the issue of the you can apply for bail in capital matters or gun firearms matters, and it clearly raised the issue of staffing. But before we go to the police commission thing, which is a kind of thing I probably didn't want to go to because
it pales in comparison to this issue.
I mean, but it's like chasing your tail in Trinidad and Tobago. I mean, Mr. George. I mean,
actually, I prefer if we stick to this and we can deal with that on another occasion because this I think is more important for the nation because of the dynamics of it and the implications. Because remember, there's PRCO 2, there's PRCO 3, and I think I heard of PRCO 4. So you're talking about several other criminal matters all hinging on this. And the fact of the matter is that this now is teetering on the edge of the precipice, and the state is now trying desperately to hold on to it, to cling on to it, to prevent it from going over the edge. And we don't know if it may be possible or what decision the DPP may make. I saw the minister in the Ministry of the Attorney General office. She gave, what can only be described as, an aspirational statement where, she said, well, she's received certain advice.
But Mr. George, I've gotten clearance that we could continue our discussion on this and leave the police commission foolishness for another time. But,
yes.
but the thing is that it's easy for she to say that. She don't have to pay for it. It's we, the taxpayers, paying for it. So the point I'm trying to get at, and don't get me wrong, I fully understand if we're really talking about a proper functioning civilized society, we must have laws and jurisprudence and the rights of appeal and so on. But the thing takes so long. It costs so much money. At the end of the day, those who are well-resourced are able to frustrate the process even longer, notwithstanding the challenges that you just highlighted about the prosecution side of things. The question is, Martin George, where are we really going as a society when it comes to the issue of this shallow phrase about justice for all?
Right. So the thing is, Fazil, I think we really need to look at the state apparatus in terms of the state attorneys and state briefs, because it has become a well-known racket. And that's the only thing I could describe it as. And I think that's what you, trying in your own very polite and gentle way to allude to. Because what has happened, Fazil, is that with each change in government, you see the legal friends of that political party, they are the ones getting the state briefs. And it has become such a mechanism for funneling money that what happens is that these matters, the longer they drag on, the happier the attorneys are, because the more they can keep billing, and it's the public that is paying. So I think what we need to do is maybe set up a separate, independent department which basically provides a resource pool of attorneys for the state, for the DPP. So that way you have them being trained there and you have that resource available. So they are state employees on a fixed salary. The point is, when you have these open-ended legal briefs with no cap whatsoever, then of course it is beneficial and preferable to some of the attorneys for these things to last forever, because it becomes the gift that keeps on giving.
Absolutely.
It just never stops.
But like in this particular matter, obviously it's a major issue. It was a major scandal, public money, hundreds of millions of dollars. But here we are, Martin George, 20 years later, and it's like we're talking about trains 1, 2, and 3, and 4 down south. We're now hearing about matter 1, matter 2, matter 3, matter 4. I mean, if you understand the point that I'm making, as far as it's not about letting people get away with what they did or anything like that, but when we talk about justice delayed being justice denied, however this matter is resolved, or many other matters that people could highlight, can we really say that justice is being served in Trinidad and Tobago in matters like this?
And the simple answer to that is no. I mean, I will tell you quite frankly, it could never be, because any which way you look at it, you are going to have a level of dissatisfaction by certain segments of the population to feel that, look, this was not a fair process. And part of the foundation of your justice system is that the participants must buy into the fairness, the inherent fairness and equality of your system. Because if they don't, then the point is it will always be seen as either biased or oppressive in that regard. So when something like this goes on and on forever, then of course you will always get this type of feeling that people think, well, it has now morphed from a prosecution into a persecution. And then, of course, in Trinidad and Tobago, all you need to do is add a dash of the political flavor. And, that's it. You have a kalaloo mixed up with a curry, a crab and dumpling, and some Chinese food on top of that, because we have Kwaitong in the mix. So, when you look at it, it really then becomes, just old mass and bacchanal. And that is where we are at in this matter.
And therefore, I mean, it just seems so convoluted, so costly to the state, which means us as tax-paying citizens. The point is there any light at the end of the tunnel? Not just in this particular matter, but I mean, surely in the same way that we look down upon those at the lower level with CPEP contracts and so on, which is why I refer to the legal profession as CPEP for hoity-toities, because it just seems to be feeding at the trough. But don't these individuals have a conscience, Martin George? Don't these individuals say, look, I mean, how much money is enough money for a matter that is not clearly being pursued in the state's interest anymore?
Well, and you see, and that's why I blame the governments also, because successive regimes have enabled this whole system. And we need to look at it one day, Fazil. One day, Trinidad and Tobago has to wake up and take stock and look at it and put a stop to this legal racketeering. Because that's exactly what.
But who is going to do that, Martin George?
Individuals. In other words, if the government changes tomorrow and UNC goes into power, I could give you a list of maybe 20 attorneys who are guaranteed will get work under UNC because they are known UNC associates or supporters. Then, of course, you have the clever ones who are able to manipulate their ways under whoever is in power, PIP. So
party
you have
in power.
Of those who they go with party in power. So it's really interesting when you look at it as to those who have gotten the government briefs, and maybe we ought to do an audit and publish the results, so that people can see, and then maybe only then the public will have some kind of outcry where they will say, hey, listen, this has to stop. It's not fair to the nation. And this is part of the problem. It's not
Okay.
the only aspect of it, but it is part of the problem.
Okay, but who puts a stop to it? If, for example, even if there were to be an outcry from the citizenry, this thing has to stop. Who stops it? Because the people in governance are invariably lawyers themselves or closely associated with lawyers as well. So who actually puts a stop to this?
Well, that's the challenge for you. That's the challenge, because when one party is in opposition, they point fingers at the other and say, look, you're only feeding your friends in terms of legal briefs, etc. But then when they get into power, they do the same. So it really ends up in, a scenario where you basically face with Hobson's choice, so that, damned if you do, damned if you don't. You put one in government, they do the same thing. You put the other one, it's basically 6 of one and half a dozen of the other. So it really comes down to a question of, I guess, maybe public commentary, public discourse, raising the level of public awareness so that persons can really make these things hot button issues that can somehow hopefully put some pressure on the politicians to make some changes. I mean, for you, I know it's very frustrating because you deal with these topics every day and you feel like you see no change whatsoever. And, it seems like we're just talking in the wind, and, you're spitting in a thunderstorm, basically. But we must not despair. We must not give up, because this is part of the growth process. These are the growing pains of building a nation. And that's what I think we are all committed to in this regard. So we have to persevere. We have to keep pounding the issue. We have to keep discussing them. We have to keep raising that level of public consciousness, because it resonates. And for you, I'm sure you meet people who tell you, hey, listen, boy, I was glad you raised that topic because it's important. So there are pockets out there in the society where the message is falling on fertile ground. It may seem as if most of it is falling on barren ground, but at the end of the day, those little seeds that are, germinating and beginning to grow, those will become mighty oaks one day from the little acorn. So we have to still persevere. And I know you're going to say, I am just being optimistic and unrealistic. So go ahead.
But no, I understand the point that we have to pursue and we have to press on, hopefully in the interest that people will actually see what is actually good for the nation. But I mean, just to give you an example, I respect your view, even if I disagree about the Privy Council and so on. But when I hear legal professionals saying this must go to a referendum, knowing full well that we don't even have that in our constitution that makes a referendum relevant. It's kind of like the unions passing a motion of no confidence, which is of no value. Them playing Dolly House on Labor Day.
And then wait, taking it to CARICOM.
Taking it to CARICOM and Kamla and all kind of thing. I mean, this is a theatre of the masquerade. No wonder Carnival is our national festival. We like to put on a show. So just as a final point, I mean, just on that issue that I raised about the referendum, how do people feel comfortable saying things that they know can't even get off the ground in Trinidad and Tobago and call themselves legal luminaries?
Well, I mean, in fairness to the comment that I saw, I mean, there was the caveat that, yes, we do not have it as part of our law.
So what you calling for it for then? we don't have it, but you're calling for it.
But yeah, given that fact, then we know that it's hardly likely to ever happen at all, in those circumstances. So, I mean, I guess it makes for a good soundbite and a good press conference, which might have been the effect.
and just, as we talk about, I mean, you're a legal professional yourself. Is there, I mean, it might sound like an awkward question. Is there a level of comfort that, all them media people could run them out, or commentators could say what they want? They can't change nothing, we like it so? Is that the vibe inside of there?
There is that level of comfort. I think certainly the coziness between the government of the day and their preferred legal luminaries in terms of whom they would choose to brief, etc., because they know that their retention by the state has nothing to do with, first of all, competence or ability. Not that they lack that, but if it were a criteria, those would not be factors that determine them getting briefed. It's their associations and their relationships. And similarly, as I say, when the other side gets into power, when UNC gets into power, they have their preferred slate or slew of attorneys whom, as I tell you, we could call the names for all of them on either side. We know the names, we know the players, we know the participants. And I think that that really is at the heart of part of the problem. If you look at PRCO 1, PRCO 2, PRCO 3, PRCO 4, I think that is an example of the quagmire in which TNT finds itself through this whole issue of state legal briefs.
Martin George, we want to thank you very much. I ran out of spit this morning. I've been spitting all over the tablet while I was getting worked up about this issue. But we might be smiling and laughing, but it is a serious issue as far as governance in Trinidad and Tobago. And we want to thank you very much indeed for taking the time to speak with us this morning.
Have a great morning.
You're more than welcome. 7:26 in Trinidad and Tobago. Yeah, the union, big tralala, June 19th. But everybody speaker one after the other, motion of no confidence. Plain Dolly House on Labor Day. We'll be right back.